everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week I have 4 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks at home. And that's going to include Janus and Oblivion, the LitRPG Saga, The Nightmares of Alamir. Also, Dark Fearless Pioneer book number 1. And then also Cannibal, Demon of the Mind, a post-apocalyptic survival lit RPG series. And then last but not least this week, it'll be Raze, the Completionist Chronicles, book number 4. So many great stuff here. We're going to go into, well, not LitRPG, low LitRPG news here, so I'm not going to have to play anything. I just like the music, so I'll play it anyways. Just enjoy the music. There really is no LitRPG news. Unfortunately, just kind of a slow week. Nothing really happening in the LitRPG community that's out there. I'm sure there's some stuff, and as an author, you have announcements to make or special deals on your book products or things you want to announce to your larger audience. Always feel free to email me at feedback@geekbitespodcast.com or at litrpgpodcast@gmail.com and let me know. And we're happy to drop it in our news section. So there you go. But for right now, we're going to move on to the stuff that is out now, that is out for people to read. I haven't read them, but they're available for you. So that includes Controlling the Goddess, Chronicles of Kira Freya, book number 2. That is out as an ebook. It's been doing pretty decently. That's from Michael Anderle, who's a right-to-market author. This is his first lit RPG book. He has 2 other titles that are kind of game-lit book that he's co-authored with some other people. I didn't care for book number 1. There were game mechanic issues and issues with mechanics not really mattering, but that doesn't mean that other people didn't like it. There's a lot of fans who have enjoyed it, and book number 2 is out for them and for anybody else who's enjoyed that series. Also out right now is The Other Core, Station Core's book number 5, which has been doing amazingly well. I'm super proud of Jonathan Brooks for doing such a good job with this novel right now. Also out is Renegade, Nova Online book number 2 from Alex Knight and Portal Books. This one is a super surprise that it even exists, to be honest. Book number 1 came out, I want to say a year ago, maybe longer. And it did okay, but I don't think it did well enough for it to be an immediate priority for the company, for the publishing company, Portal Books. But book 2 is out, and they have an audiobook out at the same time. So good for the company for not giving up on a series. I liked book number 1. There were issues with it, though, on a game mechanic level. And hopefully book number 2 is going to have that all straightened out and make the mechanics matter. So I'm hopefully we'll get a chance to read it, but it is out for you. Also out is the 4th book in the Realm Between saga, Between series called Magic School, as is a new book called Quest for Vengeance, the LitRPG Saga, Hero Online book number 1. The 2nd volume in the Blackthorn saga, the Blackthorn Breaking Free, the Blackthorn Saga volume 2 by Scotty Hooch, is out as an ebook. Remember the Blackthorn series is actually something that Scotty Fitch published online already in a large volumes, and he's just kind of been collecting them and editing them and rewriting them and making them make more sense sometimes and publishing them. I really enjoyed Blackthorn 1. It was a really nice story, and I'm looking forward to giving Blackthorn 2 volume 2 a read. Also out as is Endless Online Wild Cards Queen Killer, a LitRPG adventure. I believe the story it's set in the Endless Online universe, but it's not from the same main characters. It's a different point of view, apparently. So I don't want to say it's a side story, but it's a story set in the same universe as Online, but it's not the same characters, apparently. Also out right now is Warped Forest, a 100 Halls LitRPG and Gimlet novel. That is out as... I haven't heard of it. It just popped up as out. It does have levels and RPG progression, at least in the part that I was able to kind of look through and skim through quickly. So it's there. Also out as the 2nd book in the Beastmaster series called Beastmaster's Omnicide. The 3rd book in the Chaos Emperor series called Fallen, which is a World of Game series. This is kind of, again, another kind of side series from the game, you send the game universe. So there you go, and that's the stuff that is out now that I haven't had a chance to read. Also out as audiobooks, we have a nice selection of stories as audiobooks. The Heroic Villain and Charles Dean, narrated by Jeff Hayes and the Sound Theater Crew, is out as an audiobook. I really like the ebook version of this. I can only imagine that the audiobook version is going to be even better. So definitely go check that out. Rebirth Online book number 5 is out as an audiobook as well. Trial and Flame Chronicles book number 2 is out as an audiobook. I actually like the series. The thing that really throws me off about this is that the author, and he does sound Johnny. I messaged him about it, and he said he does do it intentionally. He does do it intentionally, rather. That all the books in his series and all the audiobooks in his series have different style cover arts, and it always bugs my brain because it's harder for me to identify a new book in his series if the cover art doesn't have at least the same style as the last one. If it looks like too different, or if it literally changes art styles, it's hard for my brain to make the connection that this isn't a new book, but rather a book in a series that I've actually enjoyed. So Chronicles, Trial and Flame, out as an audiobook as well. You can already mention that the Renegade Nova Online book number 2 series is out as an ebook and as an audiobook simultaneously, which is really challenging to do. So there is that. Station Core book number 1, a very nice series that I personally enjoyed. Book number 1, give it a 7 out of 10, I believe. Somerset by Aaron Oster, the Rules book number 1. I can't remember if I gave this a good review or not. I believe I did, but I can also have to look it up at some point. So to say, but the audiobook is out for that one. Kill Streak book number 2, Heavy Armor, is out. I haven't read this, so I can't give you a review reminder for it. I recall book number 1 not working for me, though, so there is that. But the audiobook for book number 2, Heavy Armor, is out right now. Scourge of Souls, The Realms, book number 4 by C.M. Carney is out. I enjoyed that one. I remember that one very clearly. Got a good score for me. 7 out of 10. I can't remember what decimal it was specifically, though, so I can also it was at least a 7 out of 10. The Scourge of Souls, The Realms, book number 4 is out as an audiobook, so there we go. On to upcoming LitRPG. This is just me reading out stuff that's going to come up in the future. We have a few new editions. So whether you're an author who wants to find a good slot for a story in the near future, or you're a reader who wants to plan ahead for their purchases, that's why this list exists. So, but if you're not interested in those things, feel free to skip ahead to the actual reviews. Reading Gate Online, Inquisitor's Foil, the 3rd book in the Illusionist series, will be out on July the 30th. Sky Realms Online, Greyhold, will be out on July the 30th. Imprisoned Online, out on July the 31st. August the 1st will be Shade's First Rule, Divine Apostasy, book number 1. Varnoth, The Black Blades, book number 1 will be out as on August the 1st as well. Hero Go, Champion is Playing, book number 3 will be out on August the 5th. Shadow Sun Expansion, Shadow Sun book number 2, we talked about this last week. It'll be out on August the 5th, even though there is no current pre-order. The author has assured me that he is going to be sticking to this publication date. I like book number 1 quite a bit. So I'm looking forward to reading book number 2. New to the list is going to be NPC Lives. Lives book number 1, Tales from the Dead Man Inn. That will be out on August the 7th. This is from Dan O'Shinofin. He recently let me know about it. It's apparently a short story collection from the Alpha World universe. So I'm hoping that this is going to be like super interesting. I'm a big fan of the Alpha World series. I think that it's one of the most interesting literary series in the way that the main character has explored his past and his character development. I think it's a really interesting way that the story has unfolded. There are some adult themes to that particular series, though, so just be aware of that. But I'm looking forward to seeing some smaller stories, see what Daniel Shinofin has to bring to the table on the short story side of things. Also out on August the 8th is going to be Invasion, book number 1, which is the new series from Vasily Manko, set in the same universe as The Way of the Shaman, the Barleone universe. It is apparently going to be taking place after the end of the Way of the Shaman series, but again with a different main character. So it's not going to be the same events as The Way of the Shaman from a different point of view or anything. It's literally it's continuing the same timeline after the events of End of the Way Shaman, but again, different main character. So an entirely different point of view from that. You'll have appreciated like the lore potentially, and the game mechanic changes from that particular series starting out in this novel. So there you go. Out on August the 10th, Eden Gates book number 6, The Ascent. On August the 12th, Dungeons of the Crooked Mountains, Scoundrels and Scamps will be out on August the 15th. August the 22nd, the second book in the Dragon Heart series called Iron Will. The third book in the Galacticon series will be out on August the 30th. On August 31st, it'll be Zones of Alacria, a new series that somebody's written. Then it'll be on September the 2nd, A Game of Villains, World of Karik. September the 6th, the second book in the Carillion Server series, Cliffs of Eldamar. A new book from Dan Sergeloff on September the 9th called Blood of Fate, World 99, book number 1. A LitRPG Wuxia series, Wuxia series. The second book in the Gloominess story, which I didn't really care for, but Gloominess book number 2 will be out on September the 10th. Bibliomancer, again, this is that interesting collaboration between Dakota Cart and James Hunter, set in the Completionist Chronicles universe, which the fourth book in that series that we're going to do in the podcast. That'll be out on September the 17th, called Bibliomancer. So there we go. Yeah, and first song is apparently going to be out in September instead of August. So you have that to look forward to. That was I think an update from the author since, this is here. And October the 21st, it'll be Dead Man's Retinue, the third book in an NPC's Path series. So there we go, folks. All the stuff I know about all the way to October, so you can plan your purchases appropriately. On to, though, new releases and reviews. Okay, first story of the week to be reviewed is going to be Janus and Oblivion, a LitRPG Saga, The Nightmares of Alamir, written by Noam Oswin. It is 332 pages, $4.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. And I'll be honest, that was probably one of the issues. Like, do I want to try this out? Because, well, I'll get into it in a second. Here's the novel description. Not many refuse heaven. Fewer reject paradise. Certain rare are those who would find themselves before a being of unknown power and point out the demerits of nirvana. One man does. When the aloof forced son of a business mogul makes the decision to save a life at the cost of his own, he discovers that what awaits him at the end of his mortality is not eternal oblivion. He cannot help but be disappointed. When he realizes the world he's been brought to works like the old fantasy games he used to love, he begins to see the merits. If only he did not start out as the weakest thing in existence, and if only the world he was in was not populated with madness-inducing creatures and fates worse than death. Decide for yourself your fantasies and your nightmares, your companions and your adversaries, your angels and your demons, your gods and your monsters. Alamir stretches to you a hand of 1,000 possibilities. You only need take it. So there you go. That's the novel description. And I'll be honest, this is a slightly older title. I didn't pick it up when it came out. One, because it doesn't sound like LitRPG. Just from the novel description. It is. It absolutely is. It's actually pretty well detailed. The other issue for me was that it's not in Kindle, which for me always makes the novel less likely to be read because you have to invest dollars into doing so, and you're kind of taking a risk with your money. So for 330 pages, $4.09 initially, again, it didn't seem like it might be worth it, but thankfully I gave it a second chance. I saw some of the reviews on Amazon, and they mentioned that it was LitRPG, so I made an effort to read it, and I was very pleasantly surprised, personally. The story grabs my attention from the very first pages, and it never lost it throughout the entire novel. It starts out with the main character being human in a normal world, and it takes this surprising twist in the story and turns into a multi-narrative a re-monster story, if you've heard of those before. The re stands for either reincarnated or reborn. And it's the kind of story where the main character somehow either reincarnated or transformed into a monster. And the story is about his growth and evolution from something weak. In this case, the main character starts as an earthworm. It's a tiny spoiler. And the RPG elements in the story are particularly strong. I personally enjoyed all the monster powers and the way the main character intellectually exploits the system to become more and more powerful. And I particularly enjoy the evolutions that the main character goes through. There are 3 or 4 other narratives besides the main characters in the story. And some of those stories don't actually do anything besides some world building in the novel. One in particular actually does connect to the story eventually, and it kind of ties everything in. But several of those other narratives are like, oh, those are interesting world building. They feel a little fantasy-esque, but they do help flesh out like the larger world. And I feel like they're going to be something that's going to maybe play into the other books in the series when they're written, like books 2 and 3. I feel like they're more setup sections. But they were a little disappointing in the fact that they didn't actually have a lot of mechanics, or they didn't actually matter to the main storyline potentially. So slight complaint, but again, overall, I was entertained. Again, I personally like this kind of story that's told from the monster main character's point of view, and I especially like re-evolution stories, just because I know that the evolutions are going to be interesting and complex, and I always like different points of views in a story. So I actually usually generally enjoy a monster main character story. Overall, again, it's a good re-monster story if you like the kind of stuff, and I'm glad I picked it up, even if it's an Kindle Unlimited. So for me, it gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. That's Janus and Oblivion, a LitRPG saga, The Nightmares of Alamir, book number 1, with a score of 7.7 out of 10. Okay, next is going to be Dark, Fearless Pioneer, Dark LitRPG, book number 1, written by Arthur Stone. It is 360 pages. It is $3.99. It is also not available on Kindle Unlimited. Again, another story. Here's the author's description. It started with a girl. One he had seen many months past, and only for a few evenings. Her father, as it turned out, was a barbaric maniac, straight out of the foulest dungeons of the Middle Ages. Decades in the 21st century, the madness seemed terribly out of place. Yet, he was also a powerful mogul, and determined to turn the life of every man who had ever been romantically involved with his daughter into a particular variant of hell, only made possible by the latest VR technology. All 17 of his girl's former lovers who would suffer in virtual reality until they snapped. The torturers had considered every possibility and taken every measure to assure their success. Not even death would offer their victims an escape. No harm would come to their bodies, of course, only their minds. For the first 16, the project succeeded, but the 17th was different. The 17th was dark. And I'll be honest, that novel description does nothing to tell you about the good points of the story. I'd say the cover art actually does a good job of kind of conveying some of the highlights of the story to me. But that novel description really just kind of describes the first 10-ish%, kind of the setup of the story, and does little to nothing to describe some of the highlights that I thought were really good about this novel. The first 10% of the story, again, is kind of covered by the novel description. And it was honestly the hardest part of the story to get through. So if you're just reading a sample of the story, you might put it down thinking, oh, that's all this is. It's some really dark stuff. It's like grimdark. There's torture. The background information for the main character doesn't really matter to the story. And it feels like it's describing a world the main character is not going to be a part of for a very long time again, like the werewolf stuff. And so it's definitely the hardest part of the story for me to get through. It really just sets up why the main character is thrown in this full immersion virtual reality game. And again, it's kind of this dark section of like legitimately like disturbing descriptions of torture, convoluted setup, and a background that doesn't really matter. So, but after that section, the novel again loses most of the grimdark stuff. There is no more torture, but it makes this really interesting twist. It becomes kind of this survivalist crafting story with the main character stuck in a high-end zone, facing monsters who are more powerful than him with nothing to either fight them with or protect them with. So it's a little bit of like, oh, the main character keeps dying and respawning, but he uses that to gradually become more powerful, and he's like exploiting the game mechanics to a degree to to survive and to live and to become and to craft and to it like I said, it really does have this like Clan of the Cave Bear kind of vibe, at least in the beginning portion of and middle of the story, where the main character literally starts out naked and he has to figure out a way to craft the most basic items of like clothing and tools, and from there like make more improved tools and better clothing and weapons to fight with, because he is facing monsters who are like a lot more powerful than him, because he's starting at level 1 and he's starting with a very broken character, and he has to overcome that using intelligence and strategy, and the ability to kind of like create tools and shelter. And again, it really does have this nice survivalist kind of crafting thing going on. I think that's probably the biggest feature of the story that it's going to appeal to people. Like I said, the first 10% is probably going to be distracting, and it's going to be, for me at least, it was kind of a turnoff. But once I got past that, once I got to the actual virtual reality game, the LitRPG stuff essentially, then I was like really pleasantly surprised with the level of detail in the crafting system, and the way the main character increases his powers, and the unique race stuff that it's incorporating to his broken character, and turning again detriments into benefits kind of stuff. Really interesting. It's also a solo story, which I personally enjoy. When there's like 30 different main characters or secondary characters, it always gets a little confusing to me. So the fact that this is really just focusing on one person and their solo kind of journey here was really nice for me, at least. I like that kind of stuff. The RPG stuff, again, there's lots of it here, including skill increases, levels going up with the progression system. It doesn't become like a huge focus until like 20% mark in the story, when the main character starts like developing that system intentionally. But again, it becomes like a really big part of the narrative structure, mid to late story, in the main character living, surviving, thriving, and trying to not go mad from loneliness sometimes. I think they're a really interesting concept here. Overall, again, I like the story once I got past that first 10% grimdark stuff with the torture and the real-world background stuff. I like the survival aspects. I particularly like the emphasis on crafting and the smaller solo story. But the story overall is kind of slice of life, and that if that's a turnoff for you, maybe this isn't for you. But if you're okay with that, and you like Arthur Stone, like if you read Arthur Stone's work before, he does quite a number of LitRPG series and some other stuff that's kind of game LitRPG adjacent. And all of his stories are kind of like this. So they're very slice of life. They're very interesting, and they do combat well, and they do other like game mechanic aspects well. But again, they're always very pretty slice of life. So if you like those other stories from the author, you're probably going to like that particular aspect of it. But for me, the big highlights again were crafting, solo journey, and like this like survival aspects. I really do like compare it to like Clan of the Cave Bears in that kind of tone. Like obviously it's not Clan of the Cave Bears or like that survival stuff, but the survival actually exists. And I appreciate it. So like the cover art really does kind of give you a clue as to kind of the tone of the story. So I appreciate it. I had a good time with it. Its score is 7.6 out of 10 for me. Dark Fearless Pioneer LitRPG book number 1 gets a score of 7.6 out of 10. And next we have Cannibal, Demon of the Mind, a post-apocalyptic survival LitRPG series written by Ivan Shaman. There we go. It is 388 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. An act of terror eliminated civilization. 90% of all adults died, and 9% became zombies, whose brains were slowly recovered by nanites. Only 1% stayed human. Life had been turned into something resembling a computer game where levels were increased by absorbing the nanobots from other bodies. Presumptuous mankind had destroyed itself, but it might still be reborn in a new form, with a new meaning, with the Soul Sun, and with the new god of the Supreme Mind. Warning, this fiction contains gore. Okay, well that's the novel description. I think this novel kind of does a disservice to itself. It's a translated Russian LitRPG novel. But the novel description, I don't think does a really good job of grabbing your attention. The cover art certainly doesn't. I wouldn't have even noticed that this is supposed to be a zombie hand, unless I'd already read the story. It just looks like a hand, and the like Mayan sun god token in the hand kind of made me think this was going to have something to do with Mayans and sun gods to a degree. Surprise, with the symbolism. And so the cover really doesn't grab you on, and the novel title for sure doesn't tell you much about the story. And it all kind of makes sense after you've already written the story. But the point of cover art is to get you to read it in the first place. So if it doesn't make sense until like after you've already started, there's kind of an issue there. And I think that might be one of the reasons why the novel isn't doing well, or isn't doing like terribly well. It's not doing bad or anything, but I think a lot of other people might actually like the story if they could get past those other points. There are also some translation errors and some translation issues in the novel. I don't think they're too terrible personally, but they are. Some of them do stand out. For example, some of the powers, LitRPG powers in the novel, aren't translated understandably, at least for me. Like the biggest one, and the one that repeats the most, is probably the issue with the power called Jerk. It's not described well, I think, initially enough so that people understand it, or at least I didn't. And so the main character uses it like a ton in the story. And it honestly took me like 30% of the novel to even to kind of grasp what it was. It apparently is a kind of movement ability. But for most of the novel, it's just described as like the main character's like Jerk. And then he's doing different things afterwards, like fighting up another human or another character, or whatever the case is. And there's really no description of like what that power is necessarily. It's just like, oh, he calls it out to activate it, and then something happens. There's not like this description of like, oh, he's shifted suddenly 20 feet to the right. It's just like he's just somewhere else. And I think that's just a translation issue of that particular power description of what that word could have been, basically. But there are other examples throughout the novel. It's just, this happens in language translations. It is what it is. But if it's going to bother you, it's going to bother you. Like I said, it wasn't too big of an issue outside of that one particular power for me. But even then, it didn't like ruin the story. It's just like, oh, something to like note in the review, basically. Other than that, the story I think is actually really good. It's pretty good. It won't be everyone's cup of tea. The novel is titled A Post-Apocalyptic Survival LitRPG Series, and I think that's kind of inaccurate. One, it's not really post-apocalyptic, it's like in the middle of the apocalypse. Two, it's not really survival-ish. There are some survival mechanics that are described in the story early on, but that's really not the emphasis on the story at all. Instead, I kind of personally describe it as a monster main character, techno zombie RPG apocalypse story. And this is a tiny bit spoilery, but I think it's important to note, just because I think it's a thing about the story that is going to be the hook, at least for me. The main character is the monster. It's not from the human point of view. The novel description kind of describes the situation that's happening in the story in the background, but it gives you no indication whatsoever that the point of view of the main character is the monster. It's the zombie. And I think that's the hook that's missing in the novel description. Even though it's kind of hinted at in the picture, on the cover art, it's not something you would ever like pick up just from that point of view, from that picture. The story is told from the point of view of one of the zombies during the zombie apocalypse, basically. The main character grows more powerful, he's able to increase his intelligence stat, and he slowly gains back more and more of his memories of what happened in the past. As of course, he's also gaining like these zombie powers. The story slowly reveals over the course of the novel a larger and larger picture of just what happened in the world, how it got to this apocalyptic state, what these zombies are about. But it starts off again with a very slow build-up. The story actually starts off with the main character kind of being more mindless, that like a general like mindless zombie. And then as he's applying his stat points to his intelligence, he gets smarter, and he gets the ability to reason more, and he gets the ability to be self-aware, and all those things unlock different aspects of the story. And the best thing for me, at least, was that this kind of slow mystery reveal about like, how did this apocalypse happen? Where did all these like powers come from? And like this explanation gradually grew as the story continues. And I think that for me was the best part, that kind of mystery element, like just describing what happened, because nothing for any of the characters is really unlocked as zombies anyways. Right away, nobody kind of has a full picture of it. And so as the main character again increases his intelligence stat, and increases different abilities and specs, whatever, he's also increasing his ability to understand it and realize, kind of figure out what's happening. And that's revealed to the reader at the same time. So I like that aspect probably the best out of everything. There's decent combat here. The RPG stuff is decent as well. It's well thought out. I like the powers. I like the nanobet aspect of like explaining the RPG mechanics. The main character again gets his nanas by absorbing them from defeated humans and another source, which I won't spoil. And it allows some of these like really kind of cool zombie specializations. That was nice. However, the fundamental RPG system isn't particularly complex, and that's probably not the reason you're going to read the story. And mid and late levels in the story, that RPG progression kind of becomes a little less important and prominent, and that's okay. The setup is done in the beginning, first like third of the story basically, and the story kind of becomes a little more prominent, like that background stuff and the developments and that plotline become a little more important mid and late story. Overall, though, I had a good time with that. That's kind of what it came down for me. If you can get past the minor translation issues and you like a monster main character story, or you just like the idea of a techno zombie apocalypse told from the point of view of the zombies, I think you're going to like this story. I think it'll be good for you. However, if those things don't sound interesting to you, this might not be the book for you. I like this personally, story. However, I don't know that I would be willing to pick up a second book in this series. I think a lot of the thing that I like, the mystery aspect of what happened with the world and everything, is explained in book one. And so there's less of a compelling reason for me to read book number 2. I'll probably still give it a shot just because it's part of the podcast thing I do. But I'm definitely less inclined to do so. But I did actually like book number 1 here. I enjoyed this story. For me, it gets a score of 7.2 out of 10. Cannibal, Demon of the Mind, a post-apocalyptic survival LitRPG series. I had a good time with it, with a score of 7.2 out of 10. There we go. And next we have Raze, the Completionist Chronicles, book number 4, written by Dakota Kraut. It is 295 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Humanity on the run. Desperate base building. Dark deeds done during daylight. I think the author's just messing with me at this point. Okay. Joe has started to draw attention to himself and his abilities. While some of the intention is good and allows for personal growth, most of it is from various organizations that feel threatened by the sudden upswing of power that Joe's guild, the Wanderers, are attaining. As the threat to Earth begins to reach its peak, all of humanity has a choice. Flee to Eternium or stay for an uncertain future. Some stay, some go, some don't make the choice quickly enough. In Ardania, the human kingdom is seeing an unprecedented influx of people. Supply and demand is an issue no matter where you go, as a civilization of a few million can't prepare to accept an eighth of Earth's inhabitants at once. Joe sets out to solve problems where he can, but he can't be there for everyone, especially when a group of smiling enforcers are working to bring him down. So there we go. Full disclosure, I received a man's copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. Okay, this I'm a big fan of this series. I'm a big fan of the writer in particular. But this is always kind of this fun series. The action's always good. I've loved the crafting aspects of the story, the ritual stuff, the smart, intelligent magic system that's here. And this novel is no different. From start to finish, there are just so many little moments that made me chuckle and smile. I never have a bad time with the series or with anything really the author's written. There are a few notes in this particular entry into the series that I thought, oh, this is slightly not an issue, but like, oh, this is a point of like, oh, this didn't quite make sense to my brain, and I'm going to mention them just quickly, but there weren't really issues. Early parts of the story felt a little bit disconnected from some of the real world stuff. Doesn't really make sense in the context of the story quite yet. And it may never make sense. I think for me, I kind of had to compile it with the events of the end of the Divine Knitting series to make real sense in my brain. I was like, why this is suddenly a thing. On a writing level, I totally makes sense as far as like, oh, this is the next arc in the Completionist Chronicles series. So they need a big event. They need this big motivation to justify the sudden change in population. And that's going to be a thing for the series. But in book 4 of the series, it doesn't feel as important and as connected to the rest of the series as I thought it should have. And again, it's super minor complaint. It didn't ruin the story in any way, shape, or form. It brought it down like a tiniest bit in the beginning for me, but all the things you love about the series are still very enjoyable. It's great sense of humor, great puns everywhere. Sometimes I think the author he starts his stories out with, what's a good pun? And then writes around that. He has a really good pun there, and he writes the entire story around that sometimes. I wouldn't be surprised if that's actually the case. But I've always enjoyed this. The story is still very slice of life. And there's a lot of good action adventure. There's lots of good quests that goes on. And again, all the crafting stuff and ritual stuff. It's still here. It's very enjoyable. I personally, again, I always really like how detail oriented the author is in making his systems believable and in detail enough that you can kind of see the magical theory there, and how it's based on real science and real logic. And I just always appreciate that, because I know how much of an hassle and how much of an effort that takes to be so thorough. And I always appreciate it personally. Also, there's some funny characters. I personally love the coffee elemental in the novel. It's a site where that exists, but I can't believe nobody's ever thought of it before. And I think it's such an adorable character who's like, his line is like, oh, drink me, I'm delicious. And it actually wants to be drank, because that's its purpose in life. It's a coffee elemental. And I can absolutely see this character as like a plushie. It's so adorable in the novel. And I kind of want my own coffee elemental, just so I have fresh, delicious coffee every morning. That's infinitely repeatable, basically. But like I said, overall, had a good time with the story. Minor, tiny things at the beginning of the story that are just, I think there might be setups for and explained in other parts of the series as it continues on, but they were a little disconnected for me. But other than that, just everything else is really great, really good, I should say. Good time with the entire story. That's kind of the best thing I can say about it. Raze, the Completionist Chronicles, book number 4. Good time with it. Solid score of 7.5 out of 10. Not the best book in the series for me, but again, still absolutely enjoyable. Again, that's Raze, the Completionist Chronicles, book number 4, with a score of 7.5 out of 10. And that's it, everybody. All finished. Thank you for hanging out with me today. Remember to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, our webpage at LitRPGpodcast.com. All the ways you can connect to the podcast and talk to us and recommend books or look at our reviews. We have tons of back reviews for LitRPG stories at our website. And also have links to other Facebook pages where you can check them out and hang out with LitRPG authors and talk to the people who write the stories you love. So there you go. And if you want to, of course, support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Help keep the podcast free and free to people to enjoy without ads. But until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.